Welcome back. You're watching To The Point. The recent elections were a devastating blow for Omar Abdullah. His party failed to win a single seat in Jammu and Kashmir. But at the same time, Narendra Modi, a man Omar Abdullah has never hesitated to criticize in the past, won an outright majority in the Lok Sabha. So how does the Chief Minister of Jammu and Kashmir view the political situation he now confronts? With me to answer that question is Omar Abdullah himself. Mr. Abdullah, in the last couple of days, there's widespread speculation that your party's alliance with Congress is coming to an end and you will fight the forthcoming elections separately, but not as allies. Is that likely to happen?
Look, Karan, at this point in time, it would be premature to suggest one way or the other. I've also been sort of witness to the reports that have been planted in some of the newspapers about differences within the Congress over the alliance and fighting these elections together. The only thing I can say that the sentiments expressed by the Congress are just as strong in some of the cadre of the National Conference as well. But we have decided to leave the decision to the party leadership, and closer to the date we'll decide what we want to do.
In which case, when can the country expect clarity over whether this alliance will continue or not? Because you're clearly confirming that there are serious questions in both parties about its future.
I don't think it's really much of a matter for the country to concern itself with. We are currently governing the state of Jammu and Kashmir together. We will continue to do that. We have no intention of forcing an early election on the people of Jammu and Kashmir. The two parties have been given a mandate to govern together for 6 years. We'll complete our 6-year term. After that, are we going to fight the elections together or not, is something that is yet to be worked out.
But you genuinely believe this is not a matter for the country to be concerned with?
Absolutely not. Why should it be? As long as we are governing together right now, how does it matter to the country whether we fight elections together or not?
For the simple reason that people want to know whether the two parties that are ruling together will stay together later on. Surely that's not a question simply of curiosity. It's a question the voters have a right to know.
I'm sure you have every right to ask the question, and we have a right to answer it as and when we decide to take a decision. I've told you that no decision is forthcoming at the moment, and as and when we do take one, we'll be sure to let everybody know.
All right, if this parting of the ways were to happen, most people would believe that it would be a direct fallout of the very poor performance of your party in the recent Lok Sabha elections. It's that I want to now turn to. To what extent did the Afzal Guru hanging create widespread resentment, particularly in the valley, which cost you every single seat?
I think it would be sort of short-sighted on my part to blame one single issue for what happened in the elections. No election is fought on a single point agenda, and therefore while the Afzal Guru execution will have played its part in what happened in the election results, it cannot be the only reason that the two parties, the National Conference and the Congress together, weren't able to win a single seat.
The alternative, of course, is to have to accept that the National Congress NC alliance government was not impressive. That people saw 5 years of your governance and decided they'd had enough, so much so that they weren't even going to vote you back into seats in Parliament.
Well, clearly, I mean, obviously, if the people had been satisfied with what we've done over the last 5.5 years, or perhaps if we'd been able to explain to people what we'd done properly, then possibly the results wouldn't have been as bad for us as they were. I think it's rather simplistic when you sit far away from Jammu and Kashmir to assign reasons for the electoral defeat. Yes, there was a disconnect between the government and the voters, but I think more importantly than that, there was a disconnect between the government and the National Conference cadre. I sincerely believe that if the National Conference cadre had come out and worked for this election, the results wouldn't have been quite as bad. And why the National Conference cadre didn't come out and work is a conversation for another day.
All right. But one of the consequences is that your father lost Srinagar by 40,000 votes. As a result, for the first time since 1982, he's neither a member of parliament nor a member of the state assembly. I'm deliberately not counting the period 90 to 96 when there were no elections in Kashmir anyway. So isn't this outcome a blow for the Abdullah family in particular?
Well, obviously it's a setback. Nobody wants, likes to lose elections. Dr. Abdullah has never lost an election in his life before. So to have lost an election now is obviously difficult for him to reconcile himself to, difficult for all of us. I think for all of us in the National Conference, we would gladly have traded the other 5 seats for his 1 seat. But that's the way things went. He lost, and there are lessons to be learned from that.
One of the lessons people suggest is that, in fact, after this outcome in the Lok Sabha elections, you're unlikely to win the state elections in January. Are you mentally prepared, even if you're not going to reveal it in public, to accept that prospect? Or do you really believe that in the next 6 months you can turn the tide?
Well, we're working to turn things around. We hope to be able to adequately explain to people all the good things that we've done between 2009 and now. It is nobody's case that we have done absolutely nothing in the last 5.5 years. I think we can justifiably take enormous credit for the improvement in the situation in Jammu and Kashmir to a point where it is now almost natural for more than 1 million tourists to visit the valley every year. This didn't happen on its own. It obviously took a lot of effort and hard work on the part of a government that doesn't get enough credit for all the good that it's done. Whether I'll be able to turn things around adequately between now and the assembly elections remains to be seen, but it has been done in the past. Karnataka is a case in point where Ramakrishna Hegde lost every single parliament seat and then came back with a thumping majority a few months later when the assembly elections took place. So this sort of situation is not without precedent.
In fact, you're quoting a very interesting example. Ramakrishna Hegde called early assembly elections because he had lost every single seat in the Lok Sabha elections. He actually had the courage to go to the people early, in a sense almost defying them to do at the state level what they did at the Lok Sabha level. That's something that you're not prepared to do in Jammu and Kashmir. You're holding on literally till you hit the buffers. You don't sound to me as if you share the confidence Hegde showed.
No, if we wanted, if there was more than a year to go before this election, or if the duration between the parliament elections and the assembly elections had been longer than the mandatory 6 months that would have been required to organize a general election, we would have done it. But since anyway an election is due, where is the question of calling an early election? Even if I had resigned now, would elections have been any earlier than November, December of this year?
Okay, I accept that. That's probably a fair point. Let's then come, Omar Abdullah, to the Modi government. Now, Prime Minister Modi, that's what he is today, was someone you never hesitated to criticize when he was Chief Minister Modi of Gujarat. But many people are actually very impressed with the way Prime Minister Modi has started. They're impressed by his invitation to SARC, by his swearing in, by the inaugural Lok Sabha speech, the 10-point priority, the assurance to civil servants that he'll stand by them, as well as the scrapping of GOMs and EGOMs. How do you, as Chief Minister of Jammu and Kashmir and someone who never hesitated to criticize him when he was Chief Minister, view the start he's made as Prime Minister?
Well, obviously, we have been appreciative, and publicly so, of the way in which he reached out to all the SARC leaders, particularly the Prime Minister of Pakistan, the way in which the discussions and dialogue were held, the way in which channels of communication have been kept open after that. I think his choice of first country to visit being Bhutan is also a very important signal that he sent out to the immediate neighborhood, as well as to our very large neighbor in the east. All this is something to be appreciated. The fact that he's kept his government down to a very small size is also obviously something that bodes well for the country. Some of the areas that already are giving us cause for concern is that he promised us good days. He said, "Achhe din aane wale hain." And almost as soon as he's taken over, he's now telling us to prepare for tough days. So clearly he's setting aside the promises that he made in the election, because reality has been quick to bite. The fact is, if he hasn't already realized, he will soon realize that most events are not within his control.
Can I interrupt?
He's going to have to...
Can I interrupt that point? You're
Sure.
critical of him for having actually said there are tough decisions ahead, that he will take them and he's not scared of losing popularity if he does. And you're contrasting that with his statement, "Achhe din aane wale hain." But surely that statement over the weekend is proof of honesty, that he's actually telling the country, I need to do tough things in your interest. And that's the sort of message UPA failed to give, even though practically every economist believed it was needed under UPA. Don't you give him credit for being actually honest about the state of the country and honest about the tough measures?
No, absolutely not. No, because he made it out as if every problem this country faced was the creation of the UPA and that he would solve them all. And that he would do in 60 months what everybody else has taken 60 years to do. He didn't tell us that there was going to be some uncertainty or there might be difficult decisions. Why didn't he fight the election campaign
did he know the true state of the economy at that point?
Difficult decisions.
But did he know the true state of the economy at that point? Surely he can only say this once he's discovered the actual state of the problem.
Come on, Karan, all of us knew the state of the economy. You only have to read the front page of The Economist to know what the state of the economy is. Nothing is hidden from the people. Of course he knew what the state of the economy was, and if he didn't, then he definitely should have known.
Except that your own answer also seems to suggest that Congress knew the state of the economy, UPA knew the state of the economy and failed to act. And therefore, whilst you're critical of Mr. Modi for having turned his position around, if you're consistent, you also have to be critical of your own alliance, UPA, for knowing the state of the economy and not doing anything about it.
Well, who hasn't been critical of the state of the UPA? Of course we have been. Where it has been demanded, we have been critical.
Okay.
And there is no doubt that our handling of the economy left much to be desired. The way in which we tackled inflation, the way in which we explained inflation to people has also left much to be desired. And we've taken our punishment from the people.
All right, I'm glad to hear you say our tackling of the economy left much to be desired. Mr. Chidambaram certainly wouldn't agree, but let's leave that for another day. I want to draw your attention to some...
Mr. Chidambaram wasn't the only finance minister. We've had a succession of finance ministers. So let's not pin the blame on only one person. It's collective responsibility.
Are you suggesting Pranab Mukherjee has a much larger burden of responsibility to bear?
I am saying that nothing happens in isolation. It is unfair to pin the blame on any one person.
Okay.
I wouldn't blame Dr. Manmohan Singh alone any more than I'd blame anybody else. We were part of an alliance. What we did together. And we all have to stand up and take responsibility.
Let's come to what Mr. Modi said in his inaugural speech in Parliament about Muslims. I'm going to quote to you one of the things he said. We need focused activity to change the lives of Muslims. They cannot be left behind in development. We will have to bring such programs. I do not view such programs within the prism of appeasement. I see them to bring about a change in their lives. As a Muslim, as Chief Minister of India's only Muslim majority state, how do you respond to that sentiment?
I don't, because it's pointless responding to sentiment. I think it's better to respond to actions. We've had enough of this sentiment over the years. Very little of that sentiment has converted into action. I think the jury is out, and let him deliver on this and then ask me what I feel.
Except that I want to ask you this. Are you suggesting by your answer that you're not convinced of the Prime Minister's sincerity when he said this? And are you saying that in fact you still have reservations about him and you want proof before you answer?
No, I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt, but I'm saying that sentiment alone is not enough. The sentiment is well placed, I accept that. But sentiment alone will not solve the problems. Actions will. I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt, which is why I'm not rushing into judgment and saying that all this is rubbish. I'm just saying that fine, let's convert words into deeds and take it from there.
I can accept you're wanting to wait for words to be converted into deeds, but would you concede that this sort of language is markedly different to the phraseology he used earlier when he spoke about burqa of secularism, when he accused the Shachar Commission of appeasement? Those sort of words, those sort of ideas are no longer present in the inaugural speech.
Again, Karan, I'll come back to the same point. The words, they sound good, and I'm very willing to give the benefit of the doubt to Prime Minister Modi. I hope he converts those words into deeds. The good thing is that the BJP does remarkably change its tune from its period in opposition to its period in government, which is a good thing. Now we'll have to wait and watch them actually put those words into action.
Now, something else that Mr. Modi said in his inaugural speech, which was particularly striking, was his comments about centre-state relations and about the chief ministers. And again, I'm going to quote. He said, "We cannot have a big brother attitude. We have to treat all states as equal. PM and CMs will have to work as a team." And then he added, "The states have their own problems and strengths. We have to develop a model to understand their problems." As chief minister of a state that has perhaps many problems, how do you respond to this particular attitude to centre-state relations and to Indian federalism, which no longer puts the centre ahead of the states?
I think it's a great thing. I think it's indicative of the fact that after a very long time, you actually have a prime minister who's been chief minister earlier. So even though Prime Minister Modi had the advantage of being chief minister of a very developed state, of an economically very advanced state, and therefore perhaps would find it a little difficult to understand what poor states go through, he does still understand what it's like to be a chief minister. And therefore, as a chief minister of a state, this is obviously music to our ears, and we hope that he will carry this forward. If the first visit we've had from an NDA minister is anything to go by, we had the finance/defense minister, Mr. Arun Jaitley, in Srinagar a few days ago, and we had some very fruitful meetings with him. So I have no doubt that this NDA government will try and take that sentiment forward.
In fact, I would have come to that visit a couple of days ago over the weekend by Arun Jaitley. Now, one of your key demands during the UPA days was a call for a rollback or at least a revision or dilution of the Armed Forces Special Powers Act. But in fact, when Defence Minister Jaitley was in Srinagar over the weekend, he ruled that out for now. But you were silent and you stayed silent afterwards. Does that mean you've changed your attitude to AFSPA, or you've accepted a reality that you can do nothing about? How do you explain your silence?
No, my silence, I mean, where have you heard me speak after that? The fact of the matter is that I spoke where it was required to be said. I spoke to him about it in the one-on-one meeting that we had. I spoke to him and explained the whole thing in the Unified Command meeting. This is work in progress. Clearly, they need to be convinced about the need to take this forward, and I'll continue to try and do that.
Let me put to you one of the problems in trying to continue to get this government either to revoke or dilute AFSPA. And that's a problem to do with American troop withdrawals from Afghanistan. They're going to be down to under 10,000 by January, to 0 by 2017. And as a result, fears of a blowback of terror from Afghanistan to India have probably increased significantly for those who are concerned with security. And all of that makes the dilution, leave aside the rollback of AFSPA, almost impossible to envisage any time between now and 2017-18. How do you respond to that concern?
You know, Karan, the only problem I have with that argument is that it means that whatever successes we've had in normalizing the situation in Jammu and Kashmir to the extent that we've been able to so far, and the reductions that we've had in levels of violence consistently for the last, 10 years plus, has been only down to the fact that there has been international presence in Afghanistan. And the moment this international presence ends, suddenly the situation in Jammu and Kashmir is going to go back to what it was. Now, we can't have our cake and eat it too. We can't go around and tell the world that it is what we have done that has allowed the situation to improve. It is our counter-insurgency measures. It is the cooperation we've received from the local population. It is the fence, etc., that has done its work. And then suddenly turn around when it comes to AFSPA and say, well, hang on, we need to hold back until 2017 because the international community is leaving. If somebody in a responsible position is willing to stick their neck out and tell me that the successes we've had in J&K are because of international pressure or international presence in Afghanistan, I will not talk about AFSPA until 2017, I can assure you. But if we want to take even part of the credit for what has happened in Jammu and Kashmir, we can't use the US withdrawal as an excuse not to talk about the Armed Forces Special Powers Act.
Let me put the opposite argument to you. I'm not talking about on what grounds or who claims the credit for the successes. I'm talking, in fact, about where the real threat of militancy, terrorism and jihad comes from. Kashmir was a perfectly normal state in 88, 89. Come 1990, the Russians withdrew from Afghanistan, and within months, if not shorter, there was a sharp escalation in militancy and terror in Jammu and Kashmir. Now, if the Americans are leaving in 6 months' time, in 2 years for sure, is there not a danger the same thing could happen again? And do you not therefore need to keep AFSPA on the book?
You know, that's, to my mind, a rather convoluted correlation that is being drawn up. I think in terms of our ability to deal with militancy and the sort of measures that we have put into place, most of our success and our ability to control the situation is down to steps that we have taken. And I, for one, do not believe that there will be a serious rollback or a serious escalation in militancy as a result of any withdrawal of the forces from Afghanistan.
And Asia Andrabi told this channel last night that she'd received calls from Al-Qaeda asking her to prepare for jihad. As Chief Minister of Jammu and Kashmir, how seriously do you take such warnings? Because those are the sort of fears that would probably make the military establishment feel AFSPA must be kept on the book.
Look, while I'm not going to dismiss out of hand what Asia Andrabi is claiming, I'm not unduly concerned at this point in time, because nothing that I heard during the security review meeting that we had together with the Union Defence Minister would suggest that there's anything that we should be unduly worried about.
One other question on that particular subject. At the moment in Iraq, the Nouri al-Maliki regime is in retreat, if not virtually on the point of collapse, and the country is being slowly, progressively taken over by ISIL. Do you fear that when the Americans are down to zero, the successor regime in Afghanistan could similarly crumble, giving way to a Taliban takeover with dire consequences for India, and in particular, horrific potential consequences for your state?
Again, I've already made whatever points I had to about the relationship I feel exists between what will happen when the Americans withdraw from Afghanistan and the situation in Jammu and Kashmir. What it means for Afghanistan, of course, is a different matter altogether. And I think, yes, that is obviously something that the government of India is looking at with a great degree of concern. I think more than Jammu and Kashmir, it is Pakistan that needs to worry about what will happen once the Americans withdraw from Afghanistan, because clearly Pakistan has a much bigger problem today with terrorism than Jammu and Kashmir does.
One last question, I'm going to put in a sense the opposite of what I've been arguing up till now to you. Your ally Jairam Ramesh has told the Economic Times today in an interview that Mr. Modi could be what he calls the Richard Nixon of India, that Mr. Modi could open the window to better relations with Pakistan. Given your earlier criticisms of Mr. Modi, given the fact that you are even now not fully convinced by some of the things he's saying in Parliament, although you believe and accept he's made an impressive start, do you agree with Jairam Ramesh that Mr. Modi could be the Richard Nixon of India? Or is that putting it somewhat exaggeratedly?
You know, the beginning has been good. He has reached out to Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif and invited him for his swearing-in ceremony. They've had a round of discussions. I believe that Prime Minister Modi will have more opportunity to move things forward with Pakistan than Dr. Manmohan Singh had before him, simply because the BJP will be far more reluctant to criticize their own Prime Minister than they were to criticize Dr. Manmohan Singh. Now, whether that is an opportunity that Prime Minister Modi can take adequate advantage of or not, that remains to be seen, but we definitely are very hopeful.
If I understand you correctly, you're saying he has the opportunity or at least the potential to be a Richard Nixon. It's another matter whether he actually will end up being Richard Nixon. Is that a correct summary of your answer?
I think that's a fair summary, but I mean, taking the Richard Nixon analogy slightly further, if I was Prime Minister Modi, I'd be extremely worried about this analogy, because we all remember exactly how Nixon had to leave office.
All right, that certainly wasn't something Jairam Ramesh had in mind, or either I did, but I applaud you for bringing it up. My thanks to Omar Abdullah for joining me. Thank you very much indeed. And there we end this particular episode. Goodbye. Good night.